Dust drifted low along the street, curling in restless shapes as the evening wind carried it through broken shutters and splintered porches. The town had the feel of a graveyard long before death had taken hold of it. Empty chairs leaned outside the saloon, lanterns unlit, and silence pressed down heavy on the bones of every building. Only the soft groan of a signboard, dangling by one hinge, gave hint that the place still remembered voices. Through that stillness came the slow creak of spurs. A figure, stooped but steady, pushed open the door of the boarding house. He wore the trail on his skin, every wrinkle carrying the weight of long miles and endless sun. His coat hung loose, patched and darkened with dust, and though no star gleamed on his chest, his presence made the innkeeper shrink back behind the counter. This was no lawman, yet there was something colder, heavier, about the man, something that made folk whisper after he passed. The undertaker carried himself like one who had buried too many and prayed too little. His trade was carving pine and laying the forgotten into earth, but in places where law had rotted, men like him learned to draw iron faster than sermons could save them. Rumor said his hand once found a pistol before a vulture's wing beat twice. He did not deny it. His boots touched the warped stair, and that's when he heard it. A voice, frail as wind through broken glass. "Make it quick." The words stopped him mid-step. He climbed the remaining stairs in silence, every creak beneath him loud enough to betray the moment. The corridor smelled of stale smoke and kerosene. At the end, behind a door with peeling paint, he heard the faint rasp again, pleading, brittle. He pushed the door with the back of his hand, slow, steady, as if afraid of what waited beyond. The room was dim, curtains drawn tight. On the narrow bed lay a figure beneath a rough woolen blanket. He thought at first it was another outlaw cut down by fever or bullet. But then the blanket moved. A woman's face turned toward him, bruised, hollow-eyed, lips trembling. In her arms she held something swaddled tight, hidden from view. Her eyes clung to him, as if measuring whether he was mercy or monster. "Please," she whispered, "if you have any kindness left in you, make it quick. Not for me, for what I carry." The undertaker's breath caught. He stepped closer, the floor groaning under his weight. What he had expected, a dying gunman begging for release, was not what met him. Here was a woman beaten by more than hardship, clinging to something she would rather see dead than taken. Would you trust a man who makes his living with the dead? He knelt at the bedside, voice low as thunder before a storm. "Who hunts you?" Her eyes flicked to the shutter, to the world beyond, then back to him. She didn't answer, only clutched tighter at the bundle, rocking it against her chest. The undertaker saw her fingers were bloodied, nails split, yet she held fast as though she would rather let herself be buried than surrender it. He looked away from her desperation, toward the town itself. Through the thin curtain he could see the last smear of sun bleeding across the horizon. The saloon stood burned half to ash from some raid months ago. The church bell had fallen silent, its rope cut, and its steeple leaning as if bent in shame. Beyond, on the ridgeline, the undertaker's own work marked the hill, rows of wooden crosses hammered into rocky soil. The graves were the only straight lines left in the place. He thought of the little marker where his wife lay, and beside it the smaller one for a child who never reached her first spring. That memory was a wound that never closed. He folded it into his silence and turned back toward the woman. "You don't need a bullet," he said slowly. "You need a place to hide." Her lips trembled. "There's no hiding from him." The floor beneath them quivered. A sound crept into the night. Hoofbeats, distant at first, then steady as drums of war. The undertaker's jaw tightened. He knew the rhythm, the precision. Not drifters, not drunks. Soldiers once, and still drilled in the habits of war. Out beyond the boarding house, the dusk caught fire, with torchlight. The first riders appeared at the edge of town, their silhouettes tall in the saddle, their movements sharp. They spread with the ease of men who had rehearsed it 100 times before. At their center rode a man upright, shoulders squared, uniform jacket still clinging to him, though its colors were frayed, and its buttons dulled. His face wore charm like a mask, but his eyes held steel. Sergeant Pike, disgraced cavalry, now turned hunter of men and seller of lives. His whistle cut through the air like a blade, sharp and commanding, and the riders fanned out, torches lifting. He called out in a voice that carried polite authority. "Evening, friends. We'll have the lady now. No quarrel with anyone else. Hand her over, and the town keeps breathing." The undertaker's hand drifted toward his pistol, but he did not draw. He stepped to the window, parted the curtain with 2 fingers, and stared into the street. Pike sat tall on his horse, smiling as though inviting him to supper rather than promising slaughter. The undertaker's other hand rested against the doorframe. His knuckles trembled, not from fear but from the weight of the choice before him. Behind him the woman clutched her bundle, eyes wide with terror. "If it were you, would you hand her over to save your own life?" The undertaker closed his hand around the wood. "Steady now." With a single push he shoved the bolt across the door, the iron scraping in its socket. The sound rang through the quiet house, like a verdict delivered. Outside, Pike's smile widened. Inside, the undertaker let out a slow breath, his hand never straying far from the gun at his hip, knowing the night had just begun its reckoning. Torchlight pooled through the seams of the shutters and lapped along the undertaker's face like shallow fire. It made a map of his scars. Outside, Sergeant Pike's men moved with the order of a parade, torches lifted together, boots striking boards in the same square beat, horses blown quiet as if they knew the drill. A whistle trilled, one thin reed of sound, and the circle tightened around the boarding house. Evening again. Pike called, all honey and Sunday manners. "We don't come as wolves, friend. We're shepherds. We return what is lost to its rightful fold." He laughed softly. "You happen to be holding a stray we've been paid to collect." The undertaker didn't answer. He slid the window latch and peered out with one eye. Pike sat high, hat at a courtly angle, gloved hand resting near a saber he wore for memory's sake. He had the kind of smile that looked gentler the closer you stood to a grave. Another whistle. Men posted themselves at corners, at alleys, at the stable beyond the well. The undertaker could count at least 8 within the light. Shadows on the rooftops suggested more. Pike raised a pouch and shook it, coins chiming like sleet on a headstone. "Gold for the lady. Enough to buy you a new suit and a better town. I'll even offer prayer for your conscience." He lowered his head and put on a theatrical murmur. "Lord, soften the gravedigger's heart." His voice brightened. "Or stiffen it. Either will do." In the dim room, the woman on the bed flinched. The undertaker turned, letting the curtain fall. He set the bar more firmly against the door and pulled the dresser to brace it. "Name," he said, not unkind, to the woman whose knuckles had bled onto the blanket. "Clara," she whispered. "Clara Ames." He nodded like a man measuring wood before a cut. "He means to scare us, not storm yet." "He means to make it look like we chose," she said, breath hitching. "So folks will say it was our hand that turned the key." A bullet cracked the night and thudded into the window frame, showering the undertaker with splinters. He didn't flinch. He blew the dust from his lashes and spoke low, the way men do when the next word might need to be their last. "What's under that blanket?" She held the bundle tighter, then, seeing the tremor she couldn't control, loosened her grip with effort. Not a child. Her voice was ragged but steady, closer to a confession. He bowed his head, and she eased back the edge of the wool. In the hollow she'd made against her body lay a small iron lockbox, scratched and dinged, and tied with a leather strap. The undertaker stared at it like he was looking down a well he dug with his own hands. "He'll kill any who see it," she said, "and any who might hear it described. The man reads secrets like a parson reads a Bible, and he doesn't leave witnesses in the pews." Another bullet hit the door. Pike's pleasant tone drifted through the wood. "Friend, your hinges look tired. Don't work them past their years. Let us in and rest them." The undertaker set the box on the table and took a hammer from the bedside stand. He pried the cheap latch. Inside, bundled letters shifted, the topmost curling from old sweat and damp. Under those, folded sheets bore official stamps blurred by wear, the ink gone fat and gray. He struck a match and lit the lamp, turning the wick until a pale halo lifted the dark. Clara kept her eyes on the door as she spoke. "I washed his shirts. He liked them stiff with starch and folded like flags. He forgot a pocket once. That's all it took. The undertaker set the lamp near the papers. The flame shook in its chimney, making the handwriting swim. He steadied the glass with his thumb. Names surfaced, captains he knew only by whisper. Place names he knew by ache. Gilead Ford, Dry Willow Draw, Oxbow Crossing, and dates. One in particular had the tightness of a knot pulled on a noose. Beneath the letters lay orders, special orders, stamped and countersigned. Language that could pass clean through the eye if you didn't know where to look. Disbursement rerouted. Forage denied. Disperse hostile elements. Collateral acceptable. Collateral. He could taste the ash of the word. A signature scratched beneath. Pike's full name in neat, schoolboy loops. And the counter-signature of an officer who'd drunk himself into an early grave up in Cheyenne, if rumor could be trusted. He found the one that stopped his breath. Orders for a patrol the week his wife and child had been set upon on the road north of Gilead Ford. Pike had ordered the flank reserves withdrawn. He'd left the wagons unguarded, then blamed raiders. It was dressed up pretty, all the justifications proper. But a man who had carried pine and laid it down in sorrow knew what was plain when others pretended not to see. He set the page down with a care that looked like reverence and felt like blasphemy. Clara's mouth tightened when she watched him read. She recognized the way a wound hunts the face for fresh blood. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't know who it belonged to. I only knew it belonged to someone." A hush passed between them that made the room feel larger. He closed the box and slid it back under the blanket. His face, when he turned from the lamp, was empty of everything except the habit of being strong. Outside, Pike got kinder. "You've got a reputation, undertaker," he called. "Folks say your graves are straight as a surveyor's line." He paused, then added, almost gently, "Though some say you've dug a few too shallow." The undertaker felt the words like hands pressing on the boards of his chest. He swallowed, set the hammer down, and picked up his Colt. The iron lay across his palm like memory. The smell of smoke never left the air. It clung to the undertaker's coat, drifted through the cracks of the boarding house, and turned even clean breath into ash. When dawn stretched over the town, it revealed more than riders on the ridge. Pike's men had worked the night, dragging townsfolk from their homes, stringing them from awnings and fences like butchered game. Some hung by their wrists, some by their necks. The morning breeze swung them slow. The creak of ropes a grotesque him. Clara pressed to the window and froze. Her hand shot to her mouth before the cry escaped, but the sound came anyway, a strangled moan that split her chest. Down below, a child's body dangled from the frame of the mercantile. Her neighbor's boy, the one who used to chase chickens barefoot through the street. His eyes were closed as if he slept, but his arms twisted unnaturally in the bindings. Clara's legs buckled. She collapsed to the floor, sobs racking her like she'd been shot herself. The undertaker turned from the sight, his jaw clenched, teeth gritting like stones ground under a wagon wheel. He wanted to look away, to shut his eyes and bury the image with the rest of the countless faces that haunted him, but he forced himself to see. He forced it into memory, because forgetting was what Pike counted on. Forgetting let men like Pike rule the earth. He knelt beside Clara, resting a rough hand on her shoulder. "He wants us to break," he said, voice flat as hammered iron. "Wants you to believe there's no hope left." "They killed children," she whispered, staring blankly at the boards. "What chance do we have?" "None," he admitted, and the word came bitter. "If we sit quiet." His gaze hardened. "But I won't put another in the ground while I still breathe." He rose, a resolve burning behind his eyes. The undertaker was a man of pine and nails, of dirt and silence. Yet now his tools became weapons. He brought in coffin lids from the workshop across the street, propped them into barricades. Embalming fluid, sharp and acrid, he poured into bottles with rags tied for fuses. He stacked shovels and picks, hefting them as if testing their weight, not for digging graves, but for cracking skulls. Clara, wiping her tears with the back of her sleeve, steadied herself. Her hands trembled, but when he passed her the rifle, she held it like she'd been born knowing its measure. They worked together, sealing windows with planks, lining the stair with broken glass. The undertaker's movements carried the rhythm of a craftsman. Each strike of a nail was a heartbeat. Each brace set against the wall was another vow that Pike would not walk through unchallenged. Clara knelt by the front window, squinting through a knothole, her eyes sharp, her breath even. She wasn't strong, but her gaze never wavered, and the undertaker recognized something there, a stubbornness born from pain, the kind that could keep a soul standing long after the body gave out. By midday the town grew quiet again, an unnatural hush that pressed on their ears. The undertaker sipped from his canteen, sweat dripping from his temples, when he heard it, boots scuffing the porch. Slow, hesitant. Through the slit he saw a man he knew, Jonas, the storekeeper who had once trusted him to bury his wife with care. Jonas's hat was in his hands, twisting like a rag, his eyes darting between the boarded windows and the torches outside. He whispered toward the house, voice cracking, "Let me in. I can end this. I'll tell them where she hides, they'll spare me." Clara gasped, rising, but the undertaker's hand stopped her. He watched as Jonas stumbled toward Pike, hands shaking like leaves in a storm. The man fell to his knees before the cavalry sergeant, babbling promises of obedience, begging for mercy. Pike leaned from his horse, smiled gracious, as though blessing a child. He touched Jonas's cheek with his gloved hand. For a heartbeat, it looked like salvation. Then Pike's pistol flashed. Jonas dropped face first in the dirt, the sound of the shot echoing off the empty church. Pike holstered smoothly, like nothing had happened. His voice rang out, calm and easy. "That's what betrayal buys. Quick burial." The undertaker shut his eyes a moment. When he opened them, his voice was a rasp. "He buries them quick," he murmured to Clara, who trembled at the window. "But I bury them true." Clara turned to him, her eyes red from grief, but something more than tears shone there. A decision. She drew a breath that shook in her chest. "There's something I haven't told you." His gaze cut to her. "Then tell it. I wasn't just some rancher's wife. Not only that." Her voice cracked, but she pushed on. "I was Pike's laundress once, before he took my husband's land. I washed his shirts, folded his uniforms. I heard him whisper names he meant to ruin, places he meant to burn. I stole those papers from his tent when he grew careless. I ran because if I stayed, he'd have silenced me same as the rest." The undertaker stared at her, the room heavy with the weight of truth. She looked fragile, a bruised reed that should have broken in the storm. Yet here she stood, rifle in hand, carrying the only proof that could hang Pike. He understood then that her courage, not his skill, was the thin plank separating justice from oblivion. Would you risk your soul to protect someone you met only yesterday? The question gnawed at him, though he knew the answer already. He had lost his family to Pike's betrayals. He had dug their graves with his own hands. Now he saw Clara not as a stranger, but as the living witness who carried their voices. The hours dragged, the sun arcing higher, the heat pressing down. Outside, Pike gave his men leave to mock and jeer. They dragged another corpse through the street, left it propped against the saloon door with a bottle shoved between its fingers, as if mocking the town's dead thirst. Pike let the body speak louder than bullets, tightening the noose with patience. By late afternoon, silence returned. Then Pike's voice rose, strong enough to reach through walls, smooth as if he stood in a pulpit. "Undertaker," he called, "the day's nearly done. Sundown's your sermon. You hand her over when the light dies, or I put this whole town to the torch. Every board, every rafter, every cross on your hill. Think on it well." The undertaker stood in the dim light of the boarding house, shadows stretching long across the barricades he'd built. His hand closed around the grip of his Colt, but he didn't draw. He looked at Clara, at the lockbox she guarded, at the trembling line between fear and resolve in her jaw. The fire outside waited for its chance, and the sun sank slowly toward its grave. He knew then the reckoning had been set. Sundown would be the hour where mercy and vengeance met, and only one would be left to walk the earth. The morning dragged itself into noon with the weight of a funeral procession. Every window along the main street seemed to watch, the broken shutters like tired eyelids half-closed against what they already knew was coming. The undertaker stepped into the glare, shoulders squared beneath his long coat. He carried no sermon book, no hymn, only a Colt gleaming from fresh polish, and a shovel whose blade had split more clay than steel. Behind him the boarding-house door creaked open, and Clara came out into the heat with the lockbox bound in the wool blanket, her hands knotted tight on the straps. He had spent the hours before preparing the street for death. Coffins laid crosswise became barricades, their lids pried loose and set at angles to break the line of sight. He filled some with stones to hold them steady, others with sand to stop bullets. Embalming fluid bottles were lined along the edges, their rags soaked and ready for flame. At the center of it all he stood before the church, the sun painting a crown of fire across its leaning steeple. His hill of graves overlooked the scene, white crosses standing in crooked silence, as if waiting for new neighbors. Clara drew beside him, face pale but steady. She tied the blanket tighter around the box and slipped the rifle strap across her shoulder. Her breath trembled when she exhaled, but her eyes did not waver. He gave her a single nod, and she answered with the smallest smile, as if they both knew the end would not wait for permission. The sound came first like distant thunder, then sharper, like drums rolling closer with every beat. Pike's riders crested the ridge again, not in scattered menace, but in disciplined formation. Sunlight danced on rifle barrels, sabers, and pistols. Pike rode at the front, his coat crisp despite the dust, his posture proud, his voice lifting in a whistle that carried through the valley. The small army poured into the street with the confidence of men who believed themselves already victorious. Gunfire cracked the silence, shattering it to splinters. The undertaker dropped behind a coffin lid and fired back, his Colt's bark deep and sure. A rider toppled sideways from a saddle, hoarse screaming as it stumbled through the dust. Another bullet slammed into a barricade, spitting chips into the undertaker's cheek. He rose, aimed, and sent a round into the torch hand of a mercenary, the fire spinning away in a halo of sparks. Clara knelt behind the church rail, the rifle braced against the wood. Her first shot rang wide, but the second caught Pike's lieutenant clean in the chest as he raised a carbine at the undertaker's back. The man pitched from his horse, dust swallowing him whole. Clara gasped at what she'd done, but when the undertaker glanced her way, his nod told her it had been necessary, nothing more or less. The battle twisted into chaos. Smoke from burning rags rolled low, choking the air, giving cover where none existed. The undertaker moved through it like a shade, striking with both Colt and shovel. One man lunged over a coffin. The undertaker swung the flat of the shovel into his jaw, dropping him silent. Another tried to rush the church. A shovel thrust to the gut folded him. He fired between motions, each bullet deliberate, each strike a vow. Through the haze, Pike's voice rose above the clamor, sharp and mocking. "I know you now," he called, spurring his horse closer, pistol drawn but not yet fired. "Got above, I remember. They whispered your name across camps. The preacher of Lead, the one who buried men alive in war." His laughter rolled, cruel and joyous. "And here you are, hiding behind coffins, pretending you're nothing more than a carpenter of pine." The undertaker stilled, his shovel dripping blood and dust. He didn't deny it. The silence that followed was answer enough. His secret past, the reason he had buried himself in the quiet trade of death, lay bare in the street. Clara looked at him with widened eyes, but no condemnation, only the weight of understanding. Pike reined in his horse, sliding from the saddle with practiced grace. He stepped into the churchyard, boots grinding against gravel, pistol spinning once in his hand before he steadied it. His smile was calm, almost tender. "You'll be the last grave I bless today." The undertaker walked forward, shovel in one hand, Colt in the other. They faced each other where the graves sloped up toward the hill, white crosses watching like mute jurors. Pike sneered, confident in his draw, in the men who still lingered behind him, in his belief that fate favored the cruel. The undertaker let the shovel fall into the dust. His hand hovered over the Colt, body loose, breath even. For an instant the world held its breath with him. Then steel flashed. The undertaker's draw was faster, cleaner, born not of arrogance, but of a lifetime's penance honed to the edge of instinct. His shot tore through Pike's chest, the sound echoing like a church bell rung for the dead. Pike staggered, disbelief staining his features, and fell backward onto the graves he had mocked only hours before. Dust rose around him, then settled, as if the earth itself claimed him without waiting for a coffin. The surviving mercenaries hesitated, rifles wavering. Clara stepped forward, tearing the blanket from a lockbox and dropping it in the dirt before them. The iron lid swung open, letters spilling like confession from a priest's lips. Proof of Pike's treachery glimmered in the dying light. One by one, the riders' resolve cracked. Men who had come for coin or fear turned their horses, unwilling to face the noose or the judgment inked on those pages. The street emptied as quickly as it had filled, leaving only silence, broken fences, and bodies cooling in the sun. The undertaker stood in the churchyard, chest heaving, his face drawn in shadows. Clara came to his side, her hands trembling, but her grip steady on the box that had nearly cost her life. His eyes lingered on Pike's body, then lifted toward the hill of crosses. He whispered, not to her, not to the dead, but to the silence that always waited for him. Make it quick. The wind stirred, lifting dust and carrying it down the street like smoke from unseen fires. The undertaker bent, picked up his shovel, and shouldered it once more, as if nothing had changed, though everything had. And they say on nights when the wind sweeps through that empty town, you can still hear the undertaker's shovel striking earth, keeping his promise to bury the truth no man else dared to face. So tell me, was he digging graves for the guilty, or for the last pieces of his own soul?